Hello, my name's Avon. At my parents' housewarming party, they stood me in front of everyone and handed me a family contract termination. Yeah, like I'd been fired from being their daughter. They said it was time to move forward as a family, without me. But that wasn't the worst part. They'd already sold the house I helped renovate, transferred guardianship of my niece behind my back, erased me from legal documents. And then they rewrote the story online, called me unstable, said I wasn't even their real child. So I started writing my own story. Want to know how far they went to erase me and what I did about it? It was the kind of Saturday that made Eugene look like a postcard. Crisp sunlight cut across the trimmed lawns, kids zipped past on bikes, and my parents' new beige house gleamed like it had something to prove. Everyone was already gathered out back, beer coolers on the deck, folding chairs half sinking into the grass, a Bluetooth speaker fighting with the sound of laughter. I stood near the grill, flipping hot dogs with one hand and holding a roll of trash bags in the other. I hadn't planned to stay long. I told myself I'd show up, smile just enough, and leave before the usual dynamic swallowed me whole. Then my mother clinked a glass with her fork. The crowd shifted. Someone turned down the music. She stood beside my father, who nodded like they were about to deliver something life-changing. I felt a sliver of tension rise in my chest. Not because I expected anything good, but because I knew the kind of silence that came before a blow. She unfolded a piece of paper. Clean white. Printer perfect. "Thank you all for coming to our housewarming," she began. "Before we toast, we want to share something important with you." I stepped forward slightly, trying to catch her eye. She didn't look at me. "This," she held up the paper, "is a formal notice, a realignment of roles, so to speak. From this day forward, Avon is no longer considered part of the family's support structure. She's released from expectations, obligations, and any assumed involvement in our affairs." There was a beat of silence, the kind that feels like all the oxygen has been drained from the world. I didn't blink, didn't breathe. I heard someone's fork clatter onto a plate. It wasn't the words. It was the tone, like I was being offboarded from a job I didn't know I still held. Selin coughed into her drink. Rion turned to talk to someone about baseball. My father took a long sip from his beer and didn't even flinch, like this had been rehearsed. So I said, without raising my voice, "Was this printed at a Staples?" A few awkward chuckles escaped, but no one looked directly at me. I wasn't angry, not yet, just hollowed out. That piece of paper had more presence than I did. My mother smiled like she'd just nailed a presentation. "Let's eat." People scattered like roaches in sudden light. I stood there, the sun sharp against my neck, still holding the trash bags. I don't remember tossing them. I must have. Because the next thing I knew, I was standing off to the side, near the edge of the patio, watching them group up for the family photo. "Big picture time," someone called. I moved to join, and stopped when I heard Selin murmur, just loud enough, "Maybe sit this one out. You know, optics." "Optics," I repeated under my breath. I stepped back. The photographer framed them, smiles bright, arms looped around each other like it was a Christmas card moment. And me, I stood by the trash bin, holding a plate of untouched salad. Click. Just like that, I was out of the frame. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, physically, cut out as cleanly as a photo crop. They didn't need me there. They just needed me not to cause a scene. I didn't give them one. Instead, I watched the sunlight bounce off the new windows, the ones I'd helped install back in March before the move. I thought about the weekends I'd spent here, repairing drywall, hauling gravel, holding up their dream while mine collected dust. I thought about all the times they'd said thank you without ever saying, "You matter." And then I thought, maybe that paper wasn't the insult I thought it was. Maybe it was freedom disguised as rejection. As the camera clicked without me, I finally realized this wasn't just a bad moment. It was the last straw. I didn't stay long after the photo. I slipped out the side gate while they were still posing with forced smiles and wine glasses, the clatter of polite laughter echoing behind me. The walk to my car felt longer than it should have. Maybe because I wasn't walking away from a party. I was walking away from a position I'd held my whole life without knowing it had a title. Or a termination date. Back at my apartment, I tossed my keys into the bowl by the door and kicked off my shoes. The place smelled like clean linen and leftover Thai food. It was quiet. The kind of quiet you only notice when your whole body's still vibrating from someone else's noise. I didn't cry. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the edge of the couch, and just stared at my phone like it owed me an explanation. No missed calls, no apologies. Not even a text from Celine to smooth things over, which she usually did with her fake sweet tone and emoji band-aids. I set the glass down, opened my laptop, and figured I'd check my schedule for next week. Maybe pick up an extra shift. Something grounding. That's when I saw it. A forwarded email marked FWD:family roles open parenthesis, housewarming planning close parenthesis. Sender, Celine. Accidentally forwarded from her work account. I clicked. At the top. From Thalia Harwood. To Celine, Ryan, Dad. Subject, housewarming planning notes. It started innocent enough. Menu suggestions, table setup, parking coordination. Then, near the bottom, a single paragraph caught me in the chest, like a punch I never saw coming. Avon won't be involved in the photos or speech. She's not part of the structure anymore. She'll understand. She's used to being on the outside. I reread that line 5 times. Not part of the structure anymore. It sounded like I was scaffolding they no longer needed now that the building was done. I leaned back, chest tight, fingers frozen over the trackpad. The worst part wasn't that they'd excluded me. It was that it wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't heat of the moment. It was planned, written, shared. Like a team coordinating how to fire a long-term employee without a lawsuit. I stared at the ceiling for a while, trying to decide if this was worth confronting. Then I picked up my phone and texted Celine. Me. Did you mean to forward that? No response. 15 minutes passed. Then a voice memo. I pressed play. Her voice was soft, almost sing-song. Casual. Avon, look, it's not like we hate you. You're just not needed anymore. You don't have kids, no husband, no house. This is how it works now. I sat very still. She said it like she was explaining why a grocery store discontinued a brand. Not needed anymore. As if love was a job description I had failed to fill. I didn't respond. I didn't throw my phone across the room either. I just placed it face down and walked to the window, where the last of the evening light had faded into a flat gray. They'd always treated me like the extra piece, useful when needed, stored away when not. I thought back to the time I stayed up with Leora during her senior project when Celine had a migraine. Or the weeks I lived with Mom and Dad after Dad's back surgery, missing work to make sure someone was there during recovery. Every time I said yes, I thought it meant I belonged. But maybe all it ever meant was that I was convenient. I made myself sit with that thought. Let it sting. Let it brand. I wasn't just cut out. I'd been edited out long before the ink was dry. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds like it had no idea what happened the night before. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out, letting my mind chew on every word Celine said, every line of that email. Not needed anymore. I got out of bed without checking my phone. No one would have texted. I wasn't on their radar unless I had something they wanted. It was strange, though, how quickly you go from family to footnote. After a quick shower, I made a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the same chipped mug I used when I first moved in. The silence wasn't comforting today. It echoed. I don't know what pushed me exactly, but halfway through my coffee, I grabbed my jacket and keys. I told myself it was just to get my work license. I'd left a few old documents in the filing box at the house they'd all moved out of, the house I grew up in. It hadn't sold yet. Dad mentioned that during one of his monologues about market timing, so it would still be there. Empty, but not forgotten. Driving over felt like walking barefoot across glass you laid down yourself. The house sat quiet when I pulled into the driveway. Same dull tan paint, same creaky mailbox, but no life in the windows. No Leora dancing down the hallway, no mom yelling about fingerprints on the fridge, just stillness. I used the spare key, they hadn't changed the locks, and stepped inside. It smelled like dust and faded memories. I headed straight for the closet in what used to be my room, tugged the plastic file box from under a stack of folded tarps. I flipped through folders until I found the one labeled Legal Personal. Inside were old tax forms, copies of job contracts, and something that didn't belong, a manila envelope, no label. I opened it. Inside was a guardianship document, dated 6 months ago. I blinked. At the top, guardianship transfer, Leora Harwood. And below it, primary guardian, Ryan Harwood. My chest went cold. I scanned the page again, hoping I read it wrong. I hadn't. Not only had I been removed, but I wasn't even listed as a secondary contact. Just gone. Leora was 19, still legally under care for another few months, due to the terms Grandma set up after her illness. And I'd promised, sworn, I'd protect her when things got rough. She'd lived with me for a full semester, while Mom was dealing with one of her exhaustion phases. I took her to therapy. I fought for her at school. I filled out every line of every form so she could apply for grants and housing. And now I didn't exist. I sank onto the floor, the file trembling in my hands. I thought I was done being shocked. Turns out I still had room. A sharp memory hit me. Dad talking about some little account Grandma had left for Leora. Something to help when she turned 21. A trust, he said. Nothing big, just enough for school or rent. I stood up too fast, heart pounding. My laptop was still in the car. Back in the driver's seat, I pulled up the document archive I'd set up during Leora's FAFSA hell. I searched for the fund name, found it, still active. Then I saw the listed manager, Ryan Harwood. I leaned back, trying not to scream inside a car that wasn't mine, in front of a house that no longer welcomed me. I clicked deeper. The fund wasn't being held for Leora, it was being used. Withdrawals labeled as administrative fees and household expenses. Nothing matched tuition or essentials. And Leora? She had no clue. I wanted to call her, to warn her. But the weight of that file on my lap reminded me who they'd chosen to speak for her now. This wasn't an oversight. It was a plan. They didn't just sideline me for being inconvenient. They erased me because I stood in the way. I'd always asked too many questions. Always wanted to see the paperwork, double-check the math, protect the wrong people from the right ones. And now they'd secured the silence they needed. If they were willing to erase me from Leora's life, then what else had they stolen while I was too busy saving theirs? By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun had already tucked itself behind the hills. My headlights lit up the garage door like a spotlight I didn't ask for. I turned off the engine, hands still gripping the steering wheel. I hadn't spoken a word since I left the old house. I didn't have to. I'd heard enough for one day. Inside, I dropped my bag on the floor and sank into the couch without bothering to take off my shoes. The weight in my chest had moved. It wasn't sharp anymore, just heavy, like someone had laid a concrete slab over my ribs and expected me to carry on breathing normally. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't eat. I sat in the silence, the kind that only comes after something breaks. Then my phone rang. I stared at the screen. Dad. Of course. Of course he'd call tonight. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some part of me, maybe the sliver that still needed to confirm this wasn't just a fever dream, pressed accept. Hey, kiddo. His voice came, light, like we were catching up after a ball game. You busy next weekend? I blinked. I need someone to watch the kids while we head out of town. You know, nothing big. Just a little getaway for your mom. Thought you might swing by. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, stunned by how cleanly he dodged reality. Not a single mention of the paper, or the email, or the trust. Nothing about the fact that I wasn't even family anymore, according to his wife. Are you serious right now? I said quietly. He chuckled. Well, yeah, you've always been good with the little ones. Figured this was no different. It was like talking to a fog bank. Words went in, but nothing solid ever came out. I didn't yell. I didn't lecture. I just waited for him to stop talking, then said, "I don't work here anymore." The silence on his end lasted just long enough to sting. Then came the forced exhale. "Don't be dramatic, Avon. You know how your mother is. Just do what you always do. Show up and hold it together." I ended the call. Just like that. A clean break. I set the phone on the table, face down, and stood up to pour a glass of water. My hands weren't shaking, but they felt foreign, like they'd just handled something too hot or too alive. Not 5 minutes passed before the screen lit up again. Selin. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a message. Long. Too long. I opened it. "If Mom ends up in the hospital again from all this stress, that's on you. You should have stayed quiet. You're being selfish. You always make things harder when you're not in control." I read it once. Then again. It wasn't guilt. It was punishment for stepping out of line. The thing about shame is that it's sneaky. It wears the clothes of love, speaks in familiar voices, and uses your own memories as ammunition. But this? This was no longer disguised. They didn't want me to be part of the family. They just wanted me to keep acting like I was, for their benefit. I didn't reply. I didn't even delete it. Instead, I walked to the window, looked out at the dark street, and let myself feel the edges of the anger that had started to harden into resolve. I had cooked every holiday meal, painted 3 rooms in that new house, held my mother's hand through 2 hospital visits, and stayed overnight once because she was too scared to sleep alone. I had shown up, again and again. And now they were rewriting the narrative to cast me as the villain, for finally stepping out of line. They wanted the free labor, the emotional sponge, the woman who never said no, but I was finally learning how to say it. By midweek, the tension in my chest had calcified into something solid, something cold. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about clarity. If I wanted any chance at peace, I needed to get rid of the last thing tying me to their mess. My tools were still at the old house. I had agreed weeks ago, before the contract, before the erasure, to help clear it out. One last favor, Mom had called it. I thought it would be a group effort, sorting memories, saying goodbye. But as I pulled into the empty driveway that Wednesday afternoon, it was obvious I'd be doing this alone. The curtains were gone. So were most of the light fixtures. The air inside was musty, stale in the way that only a lived-in space can get after the people leave, but the tension lingers. I found the cleaning supplies stashed in the hall closet, took a deep breath, and got to work. Room by room, I packed old books into boxes, swept dust from the corners, and wiped fingerprints off walls I'd painted myself. The fridge buzzed louder than usual, like even it was confused about the silence. 2 hours in, sweat running down my back, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "We knew you'd want to do it your way. Thank you." I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down on the counter. That wasn't gratitude. That was strategy. They'd planned to let me believe I was choosing this, to give me a chore wrapped in autonomy. But I wasn't blind anymore. They didn't come because they never intended to. I finished the kitchen, then headed to the garage to grab the last of my things. My old toolbox sat where I left it, covered in dust, wedged between a broken lamp and a paint-streaked tarp. As I lifted it, something slid from behind. A thin manila folder, slightly bent. No label, just wedged tight beneath the edge of the workbench. I opened it without thinking. Inside was a real estate agreement, date stamped 2 weeks before they asked me to help clear the house. Signatures, Thalia and Marvin Harwood. I flipped to the last page. Final buyer's offer. Acceptance. My jaw tightened. They had already sold the house before I ever touched a mop, before I carried a single box, before I gave up a weekend thinking I was helping our family transition. I wasn't helping. I was being used. Again. The words blurred on the page, not from tears, but from fury. A deep, stinging fury that settled low in my stomach, like a stone dropped in water. I snapped a photo of the signed contract and saved it. Then another, close up, in focus. Proof. Proof they hadn't just excluded me. They'd orchestrated my usefulness down to the minute. I set the file down, stood in the center of the garage, and looked around one last time. Every nail I'd hammered, every shelf I'd reinforced, every stain on the floor I'd tried to scrub out. Gone. Papered over. Sold out from under me. They had cashed in, and I was just the cleanup crew. I walked through the house slowly, flipping off light switches as I went. One by one, no goodbyes, no sentimentality, just facts. They'd planned every inch of this. When I reached the front door, I hesitated, not out of longing, but out of finality. Then I stepped outside and locked it behind me. I walked out of that house with nothing, but this time it was on purpose. Back at my apartment, the quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was loaded. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum from the fridge felt sharper, like the walls were holding their breath with me. I dropped the toolbox beside the door and went straight for the kitchen table. I pulled out my laptop, set my phone beside it, and laid the photo of the house contract out on the screen like it was evidence in a case I hadn't known I was building until now. Because that's what it was. Evidence. Not just of a sale, but of a decision. A conscious choice to leave me out. Again. I opened a blank folder on my desktop. Labeled it, "They thought I wouldn't notice." I was done pretending this was all just misunderstanding or miscommunication. This was intentional. So I was going to be intentional too. I was midway through cataloging my documents when my phone rang. Not a number I recognized, but it was local. Hello? Hi, this is Jenna from Oregon Mutual. Just a quick follow-up regarding your emergency contact update? I paused. I'm sorry, what? Jenna hesitated. Your sister, Celine Harwood, submitted a change form last week. We were verifying that you no longer wished to be listed as an emergency contact for your parents. I blinked, mouth dry. I didn't submit anything. Another pause. Right, that's what I thought. Your name was on file for years, so I figured I'd double-check. Could you send me a copy of the form she submitted? Jenna lowered her voice. Technically, I'm not supposed to, but yeah, I'll email it. Minutes later, it arrived in my inbox. A PDF scan. I opened it slowly, even though I already knew what I'd find. Celine's handwriting, her email, her signature. She'd removed me, not just from holidays or text threads, but from the actual line of care. From the place where someone would call me if Mom collapsed again, or Dad landed in the ER. The form listed Celine and Ryan as the only authorized contacts. I wasn't even a backup. This wasn't exclusion anymore. This was erasure. I hit print. Then I took screenshots, one of the email, one of the PDF, one of my old policy information, with my name still on record. I added them to the folder. They thought I wouldn't notice. Then I opened a new message. Addressed it to Celine. Attached the PDF. No subject. In the message, you want me gone? Then, let's make it official. You erased me from the record. I'm just following your lead. Let's keep it clean from here on out. No greeting, no sign-off. I hit send, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed all the way in. That night, I got one more call. Dad. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me was still curious. Avon, he said, his voice a strange mix of casual and annoyed. What's all this mess? Your sister's upset. I didn't say anything. We didn't hire outside help for the house because, well, you were there. You've always been there. We figured, why spend money when we have someone we can rely on? There it was. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You mean someone who's accessible? I asked, voice level. He hesitated. I mean, look, you don't have the same obligations. You've always been available. That word again. Not loved, not trusted, available, like an open storage unit, like a wrench. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list the years I'd given them. I just said, "From now on, I come with terms, like everyone else you hire." And I hung up. Then I turned off the phone, slid it into a drawer, and closed my laptop. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. But I felt clear. They wanted me gone on their terms. If they wanted a clean break, I was finally ready to give them one. With my name signed at the bottom, this time. By Friday, the air had changed. Not just outside, though the wind had picked up and the trees outside my apartment were starting to rattle, but in me. I wasn't raw anymore. I was resolute. That morning, I brewed coffee and sat with my laptop, reviewing the folder I'd been building. Digital breadcrumbs of every decision they thought would go unnoticed. But as I sipped and scrolled, a message pinged through on Messenger. It was my cousin Shelby. "Hey, what's going on with your mom's Facebook? Why is she saying that stuff?" My pulse skipped. I hadn't even opened social media in days. I clicked the link she sent. It was a photo post. My mom standing in front of their new house, smiling with a glass of wine in hand, surrounded by Celine, Ryan, Kale, and Leora. Everyone looked perfectly arranged, like a catalog page of familial bliss. But it wasn't the photo that gutted me. It was the caption. "Surrounded by my true family. It's been a hard choice, but necessary. Some people just aren't blood, no matter what they claim." The comments underneath piled up like dirt on a grave. "So brave to cut out toxic energy. Family isn't DNA, it's loyalty. Proud of you, Thalia. Some people just bring drama." Then came the reply that made my stomach drop. "She's not even my real daughter. She's been estranged since she was a teenager. It's been years of emotional distance. This was long overdue." I couldn't breathe. Adopted? Estranged? Years of distance? I was there last month. I bought the paint for that hallway. I took her to urgent care when she twisted her ankle in February. I made soup from scratch when she was on bed rest. And now I was a stranger? I stared at the screen, jaw clenched, hands trembling. This wasn't just exclusion, it was character assassination. She was crafting a story where I never existed. Or worse, where I had always been an outsider. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was sit there in disbelief while the comments multiplied. I didn't reply. Not there, not yet. Instead, I opened a new browser tab and searched my own name. Nothing yet. But I knew how fast things could spread. It was a strategic play, make me look unhinged, disconnected, unreliable, so that if I ever spoke up, no one would listen. Later that afternoon, my Aunt Jolene texted me. "Hey, I got your mom's holiday card. Thought maybe you'd moved?" Attached was a photo of the card. The Harris family, Thalia, Marvin, Celine, Rion, Kale, and Leora. 6 names, 6 smiling faces. No avenue. Not even a "we miss you," not even a blank spot. I was erased like whiteout, like I'd never been there in the first place. I stared at the image, then saved it to my phone, added it to the folder. Another document. Another thread. At first, the pain was sharp, but the more I looked, the more something inside me steadied. They wanted control of the narrative. They were rewriting the history of my existence, but they didn't own the truth. I closed my laptop, stood from the table, and walked to the small desk near my window. I pulled out an old journal, the one I used to write in during my night shifts back in construction, when I'd jot down material costs and deadlines alongside half-formed poems and rants I'd never say out loud. I flipped to a blank page and started writing. Not a post, not a letter, but my version. Who I was. What I did. What I gave. The truth. It wasn't for them. It was for me, and for anyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong in a story they helped build. If they wanted me erased from their story, I was finally ready to publish my own. The following Saturday, the sun showed up late to Coos Bay, dragging its light across the streets like it, too, had been exhausted by the week. I'd been staying busy, maybe even a little too busy. The cafe down the street needed someone to pick up weekend shifts, and I hadn't hesitated. Coffee stains were easier to scrub out than emotional ones. At the cafe, I moved like muscle memory. Brew. Serve, smile, repeat. Brinley, the owner, had a laugh that cracked through the quiet like fireworks. She didn't ask questions when I volunteered for the early shift. She just handed me the apron and winked. "This one's yours now," she said, patting the register. "No ghosts hiding behind that screen." I liked that. I liked her. On my break, I checked my phone out of habit. A new message blinked across the screen. From Leora. "Hawaii trips canceled." That was all she wrote. No emoji, no explanation. A minute later, another message followed. "Dad doesn't want to pay for help, and everyone's fighting about who watches the kids. He's freaking out. I think Seelan threatened to pull out entirely." I just stared at the screen, sipping my lukewarm coffee with the edge of a smile. There it was. Proof. They didn't miss me. They malfunctioned without me. Every chore, every schedule, every last-minute favor I'd pulled off without complaint. It had been invisible when I was doing it. But remove me, and the whole machine sputtered. I felt something strange rise up inside me. Not triumph, not revenge. Something more like bittersweet relief. The kind you feel when you see a broken fence that used to look perfect until you stopped being the one nailing it back together. That night, while folding laundry in my studio apartment, Leora sent me a third message. A photo. At first, I didn't recognize it. Then I did. The housewarming picture. The one I'd been told not to join. She was in the front row, awkward smile in place, hands folded in her lap. The rest of the family, posed, glossy, perfect. And me? I was in the far background, blurry and bent, carrying a trash bag toward the bin. Almost a ghost in motion, unfocused, half out of frame. But still there, still there. I saved the image. Then I printed it, black and white, and pinned it above my bed, right next to a new sticky note that simply read, "Proof. Not pain. Proof." Because erasure isn't just an act, it's a process. And I was no longer participating. Sunday morning, I showed up early to the community center for my photography class. Naran, the instructor, greeted me with a crooked smile and a Nikon hanging from his neck like a necklace. "Early bird," he said. "I brought questions," I replied. He raised an eyebrow, nodding toward the open window. "Best lights right now. You want to shoot or talk first?" Both. I stayed late after class. Not because I needed the practice, but because it felt like the first place in a long time where no one asked me to shrink. Naren let me try his old Canon. "Every photo tells two stories," he said. "One you meant to capture, and one you didn't realize you were revealing." I thought about that all night. Back at home, I opened my journal again. Wrote, "They blurred me out of the picture. But now, I'm framing my own." 2 months later, the gallery smelled like old wood and fresh paint. The kind of mix that made you feel like something was beginning. Not loud or explosive, just real. I arrived early with Brinley, who helped me carry in the last framed print. Naran was already inside, adjusting a row of spotlight track lights with a folded bandana tucked in his back pocket, like a painter who forgot what century he was in. "Still time to run," he said with a grin. "I walked in," I replied. "I'm not running out." The space wasn't huge, just a converted storefront between a tailor's shop and a used bookstore. But it had character. Brick walls, uneven floors, windows that caught the late afternoon sun just right. One corner had a white painted panel labeled "Local Voices," and beneath it, the centerpiece of my exhibit. A blurry photo from the housewarming, taken from behind the crowd. You could barely see my face, half-turned, mid-step, in the background. I'd titled it, "Out of Frame." Below the title, a caption. "Sometimes being cut out is how we learn where the edge is." People filtered in. Not a big crowd, but not empty either. Cafe regulars. One of my old site managers. A woman I'd met at the co-op who ran a soup kitchen on Thursdays. Naran's sister. Brinley's roommate. Faces that didn't expect me to explain myself. And then, near the back, someone slipped in quietly. I almost missed her. Leora. She didn't make a scene, just found a seat in the back corner and gave me a small wave, the kind you give when you're not sure you're allowed to do more. I walked over. She stood. "Hey," she said, eyes misty but steady. "You made it," I replied. "They think I'm with Kale." She shrugged, pulling a hoodie tighter around her. "I parked 3 blocks away." I smiled, soft and exhausted. "You didn't have to come." "I did," she said. "And they were wrong about you, all of them. I know that now." I didn't cry. I'd cried enough for 2 lifetimes. Instead, I pointed toward the photo. "That's me," I told her, blurred, forgotten, but still there. She stared at it. "You're not blurry to me." We didn't say anything else. We didn't have to. Back in Eugene, I'd heard through my cousin Marcus that things had begun to unravel. The post Thalia made about me not being her real daughter had sparked more than outrage. It sparked investigation. Apparently, one of my uncles confronted her at a family barbecue. Someone else called out Seelan during a church committee meeting. Ryan's role in the trust fund came under quiet scrutiny, and while nothing was pursued legally, the silence that followed was damning. No lawsuits, no arrests. But consequences? Oh, they came. Whispers traveled faster than truth ever could. Reputation is a fragile thing when it's built on fiction. Seelan stopped posting altogether. Marvin got disinvited from poker nights. Thalia's invites were left unopened. They still had each other. But it wasn't the pedestal anymore. It was the echo chamber. That night, after the gallery closed, I sat alone in my apartment with a glass of water and an empty inbox. I wasn't waiting for apologies. I wasn't hoping for mended fences. I'd finally understood something I wished I'd known years earlier. Closure isn't something they give you. It's something you choose to give yourself. I opened the folder I'd kept through it all. Screenshots, copies, printouts, notes. It had become something more than a shield. It was a record, not of revenge, but of reality. I didn't need to post it anywhere. The truth didn't need volume to exist. Before bed, I opened my journal one last time. Final entry. They said I was no longer part of the family. Fine, I built one that included me. Sometimes the biggest betrayal doesn't come with yelling or slammed doors. It comes quietly, dressed as duty, disguised as love. For anyone watching who's ever been the helper, the reliable one, the one who held everything together while quietly falling apart, I see you, I was you, and here's what I learned. You don't owe anyone your silence to keep their peace. Love without respect is just control in a softer voice. And family? Family isn't just who raised you or who shares your name. It's who shows up, who sees you, who keeps you in the frame. You're allowed to draw your line. You're allowed to walk away. And when you do, it's not the end. It's the beginning of your story. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like you were erased from a story you helped build? Or maybe you were the one always saying yes until it broke you. Drop a 1 in the comments if this story hit home, or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know which corners of the world are filled with people learning to reclaim their worth. And hey, if this video didn't land with you, that's okay too. Tell me why. I'm here to listen, not just to be heard. If this story touched something in you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. We've got more real stories, more raw honesty, and more reminders that you're not alone in whatever you're walking through. Because sometimes, healing starts with hearing someone else say, "Me too." Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.